You're not going to save enough money to retire in just 1 year. But if you want to retire early, it is super important that you have a plan that keeps you on track. So this video will help you figure out exactly how much money you should save in the next 12 months if you want to reach financial freedom. And to do that, I'm first going to explain a super simple rule of thumb, which I call the $1 per hour rule. And then I'll explain how to calculate exactly how much money you need to save, which actually only depends on 2 factors. This is super easy to calculate, so don't worry about doing any hard math. But there's a chance you'll realize that you're not on track. And if that's the case, I'll walk you through 3 simple steps you can take to reach financial freedom even faster. And at the end of the video, I'll explain what I call the activity trap, which is a huge reason that most people are never able to retire early, even though they earn enough money. And of course, I'll show you exactly what you need to do so you don't fall into the activity trap yourself. And if you have no idea who I am, my name is Charles and I use this YouTube channel to document my journey to financial freedom before I turn 30 years old. And I'm hoping that everything I've learned will be helpful to you too. So I wanted to start by explaining the $1 per hour rule. Because if the only thing you did is save just $1 per hour, you would probably be on track to retire, and maybe even retire early. If you saved $1 per hour for a month, you would have about $730 in savings. And if you kept doing this for a year, you would have $8,760. That's already more money than the average person saves in a year, even though this is totally doable. And the reason that I like the $1 per hour rule is that even though this is a super easy target for a lot of people, this still might be all you need to do. If you kept saving $1 per hour over the course of your career and invested that money in the stock market at a 7% rate of return, you would have $1.8 million in your early 60s. And that's already inflation adjusted. And this is way more money than most people would need to retire. And if you're on the more frugal side of things, you might even be able to retire early. After 30 years, you would still have over $850,000, which is more money than some people need. So if you started saving $1 per hour at 18 years old, you could probably retire early before turning 50, which is absolutely crazy to me. So the $1 per hour rule is a good rule of thumb, but it's actually on the low end of what I'd recommend trying to save. And if you want to retire even faster or have even more money to spend in retirement, you'll want to save even more than that. So let me walk you through how to calculate exactly how much money you need to save in the next year. And really, there are just 2 things you need to know. The first thing you need to know is how much more money you need to save. This is just the difference between your current net worth and the net worth you would want before quitting your job. And if you don't know how much money you would need to save, the rule of thumb is to just multiply your annual expenses by about 25 or 30. And the second thing you need to know is when you want to retire. Retiring in 1 year from today is very different from retiring in 30 years from now. My personal goal has always been to be financially free before I turn 30 years old, which means I have about 5 years to work with. But you might have a completely different goal. And I recognize that not everyone has a firm date in mind. But if that's the case, just pick an age that seems reasonable. You can always adjust this later. So now you know 2 really important pieces of information. You know where you need to be, and you know how long you have to get there. The super basic approach would be to just divide the amount of money you need to save by the number of years you have left before you want to retire. And this actually works fine if you're planning to retire in just a few years. For example, if you need to save $100,000 before retiring and you want to retire in about 4 years, you would need to save about $25,000 per year. But if you have a long time before you plan to retire, there's a good chance that your money will have made even more money through investments. So if you're planning to work for at least 5 or more years, I would really recommend playing around with a compound interest calculator like this one. These investments will require that you estimate investment growth. I usually assume either 6 or 7% because that's about what the stock market has returned on average after being adjusted for inflation. So if you need to save an extra $400,000 in the next 10 years, you'd have to save about $2,340 per month, or about $3.20 per hour. And with investing, longer timeframes are almost always better. Saving twice as much money is actually a lot easier if you have twice as much time. So if you need to save an extra $800,000, but you have 20 years to do it, you would probably need to save about $1,577 per month, or just $2.16 per hour. That's still totally doable for a lot of people. But the more you can save, the better. And in this next year, I'm trying to save almost $10 per hour, or at least as close as I can get. I don't have time to explain it in this video, but if you want to see a complete breakdown of my expenses and how I plan to save almost 80% of my income next year, just click the top link in the video description. And I probably won't save $10 per hour unless a lot of you just smash the like and subscribe button, but I'm trying to get as close as I can. But in all seriousness, there's a real chance that you're doing this calculation for yourself and you're thinking,
uh-oh, I am not saving enough money.
And if that's the case, don't worry. There are 3 things that you can do to get on track to retire early. The first thing you can do is the one that everyone talks about. And while this is the most popular, it's not my favorite. Still, it's an important option, especially over the long run. Because if you aren't saving enough money, you can always try to earn more. And honestly, especially if you're early in your career, there's a good chance that this will happen anyway. Most people aren't going to make the exact same amount of money every year until they retire. So instead of saving the same amount of money every month, you might be able to save more. This will allow you to close the gap between your current net worth and the net worth you need to retire in a shorter period of time. But I do want to caution you about 2 things with this strategy. For one, make sure you're accounting for inflation. Just because you got a raise does not mean you're going to get wealthier. And second, remember that how much money you need to save before retiring depends on how much money you spend every year. So many people let their expenses go up as they earn more, but then it gets even harder to retire. And that's actually a great transition to the next strategy you can use to retire faster, which is the one that I talk the most about. Because if how much money you need to retire depends on what you spend, you can also just reduce what you spend every year, and suddenly you'll need a lot less money to retire. And remember that the rule of thumb is that you need 25 to 30 times your annual expenses before you can safely quit. So that also means if you reduce your expenses by just $1,000, you also need about $25,000 to $30,000 less dollars to retire. This is an insanely powerful way to speed up your retirement, which is why this is pretty much the top thing I focus on for all of my coaching clients to help them retire faster. And there's actually a double benefit, because if you're spending less, then you're also saving more. So let's say you wanted to save $800,000 in the next 20 years, which we already figured out would take $1,577 per month in savings. And let's say you're currently only saving $1,000 per month, which means you're not even close to being on track. But then maybe you reduce your expenses by $500 per month, which, by the way, almost everyone could do. That would mean you now only need to save $650,000 in the next 20 years, which would take about $1,285 per month. And remember, you were already saving $1,000 per month, and then you reduce your expenses by $500 per month, which means you're saving $1,500 per month. That's way more money than you need to save now, which means you're on track to reach financial freedom even faster. I know I just threw a lot of numbers at you, but the point is, reducing your expenses means you save way more money, and it massively reduces how much money you need to save in the first place. So I love this strategy, but there is just one more strategy that you can use if you're not on track to retire when you want to. And the great thing about this strategy is that you don't need to change anything. If you enjoy your current lifestyle, then maybe it's not worth it to make adjustments. Instead of changing how much money you're earning or changing how much money you need to retire, you could also just change your goal. If your goal was to retire in 10 years from now, maybe it's not the end of the world if it takes 12 or 13 instead. And given the exponential growth of investing, giving yourself a little more time might not be such a bad thing. So by using at least one of these 3 strategies, I'm hoping that you'll be on track to retire when you want to. But that's only if you avoid a common trap that prevents so many people from ever reaching financial freedom. I call this the activity trap. The issue is that people get bursts of energy and motivation. You see this all of the time with people's New Year's resolutions. They get excited to accomplish a task and they work really hard for a few weeks. So for a few weeks, there's this flurry of activity. But then their energy just fizzles out. They don't feel like they've made much progress, but it just takes so much energy to always make this constant active effort to try to get closer to their goal. This is a huge issue because reaching financial freedom takes years. For most people, it takes decades. So if you don't find a way to sustain your energy and motivation, you will fail. People get frustrated and give up, and then they aren't taking any action. But there's a simple strategy you can use to avoid the activity trap. It just isn't sustainable to rely on active effort to achieve your long-term goals. Instead, you have to build habits. Because it's not like you'll actively set aside $1 every hour. For a lot of those hours, you're going to be asleep. But you can automate this process and not think about it at all. You can reach your financial goals on autopilot. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to set up an automatic deposit from your bank account to your investment account every single week. And every week, I want you to save at least $1 per hour, which is $168 per week. But that's the minimum. Even better, use the number that you calculated for your own goals. Once you have this automatic deposit, saving money is just going to happen. And if that's all you do, you will be on track to reach financial freedom. Every single week, you're just going to get wealthier and wealthier without you ever having to think about it. And in 5, 10, or 20 years, I can almost guarantee you're going to look back and be really glad that you did it. But look, just saving your money isn't enough. If you really want to reach financial freedom, you have to also invest it. And that's why you need to watch this video right here. Because in that video, I explain some of the most important investment strategies that I'm using to retire early.